Hey there, Blue Mages, Liam here, and welcome back to Blue Academy. We're going to be getting our first look at patch 6.4 during the live letter next week, and that's got some folks wondering if we're going to be seeing the Endwalker Blue Mage update as part of that patch cycle. Personally, I don't really expect to see it until the 6.5 patch cycle, since the end of the expansion is expected to have a longer than normal content drought, and that's really where Blue is, best suited, but I wanted to put out this video anyway. I wanted to talk briefly, or I guess it's not going to be so brief, about some of the things that I think would be interesting in the level 80 patch for us. I think the level 70 patch brought some cool things to Blue Mage. We got some extra tank and healer tools, we obviously got a lot more damage with abilities like Night Bloom and Triple Trident, and overall it made the job feel a bit more polished. In general, I do like this trend, but there are some things that I think could make this feel even better and make it feel even more like a proper Blue Mage. I'm going to lay out some of the things I want to see, some of the things I'm neutral about, and some of the things I definitely don't want to see. And then I'll finish off by listing some of my pipe dreams for the job, which are things I don't expect to ever see, but I do think would be really cool to have. First, let's hop into what I want to see. I would love to see some more interesting spell combinations added to the game. We got some of this with Ultra Vibration, Triple Trident, and things like Mustard Bomb and Peripheral Synthesis. The main downside to a lot of these interactions is that they're not really relevant to raiding, but it would be cool to see something like that added that is relevant to raiding. I get that the lightheaded interaction would be a little bit overpowered on bosses, so let's try to come up with something similar but not quite as overpowered. Let's say we have two generic filler spells, we'll just call them Dingus and Bingus, and we're going to try to have them interact in a meaningful way on bosses. Let's just say they're generic 220 potency spells, however, when we use one spell, it applies a debuff to the boss, making the other spell stronger, while also applying a debuff to us, making the other spell weaker. This means that a group would benefit from having some Blue Mages take Bingus and some Blue Mages take Dingus, but you are not actually benefiting at all from taking both yourself. I think this is just a small thing, but it would be pretty cool. It makes people want to take different spells from one another, and it just adds a little bit of flavor to the job, but it's really not too overpowered. But it does sort of feed into the next thing that I do want to see. I really want to see more aspects of team synergy in Blue Mage. Currently, everyone sort of operates on their own timer. We use Moonflute openers as mechanics allow and really don't depend on each other too much for other things. I do actually really like this, as it makes us not tied to the 2-minute meta that other jobs are. However, I think there's some opportunity to have some cool synergy as part of the job. This is also one that I don't have a lot of great ideas for, but it's worth pointing out that Blue Mage operates in its own sort of sandbox, so we do have more freedom to play around with things in ways that wouldn't normally be acceptable in other jobs. I think having just some more group-wide buffs for things like mitigation or something like movement speed would be pretty cool. One thing that I think would be pretty cool would be something like a Hydro Pulse spell that acts as an AoE rescue for all allies. I think that would make things pretty interesting in fights. You could come up with some interesting strategies. And like I said, I don't really have a whole lot of ideas, but I want something sort of in that vein. Things that give us some utility that affect the whole team in kind of wacky ways. I think it opens the door for a lot of interesting approaches to fights. And it just makes the combat, different from other jobs, even more so than just not being tied to the 2-minute meta. Another thing that I want to see is the return of elements actually being relevant. At level 60, we used Condensed Libra for a damage buff, which meant we needed some different elemental aspects for our filler spells. I will say I definitely do not like Condensed Libra, and I'm glad that we no longer use it as a core spell, but I do think there's an opportunity to make spells relevant again. Since level 80 will introduce the Eden Raids, which have upgraded versions of the ARR primals, it would be interesting to see some traits learned from these enemies that upgrade our primal spells. Imagine Eruption becoming upgraded by E6, but in order to cast the upgraded version, you need to cast some number of fire spells first. This sort of acts like a job gauge in a sense, but it would be neat to see us charging up our primal spells in order to empower them to be even stronger. This sort of loops back to the synergy concept, where I think it would be cool if hitting enemies with different elements applied some kind of vuln or a part of a vuln, such that it's beneficial to continue hitting the enemy with different elements. The implication here is that if, everyone hits it with a different element in some span of time, that it gets some debuff that makes it just take more damage. I haven't really thought about it too much, but it would be cool to have people coming in as, you have your Fire Blue Mage, your Wind Blue Mage, your Lightning Blue Mage, and so on, so that it's constantly taking damage from every aspect, and it takes more damage overall as a result. Another thing that I want to see is I want to see more interesting and meaningful weapons and canes. Currently, the only thing that separates our weapons is their item level, and that's just for the purpose of the 2 materia slots on the 60 and 70 weapons. And it kind of makes it annoying to just switch between levels, because you're really just having to carry multiple weapons, but only for the 2 materia slots. It's my absolute dream to see a relic weapon of some sort, but I know that's not going to happen. But it would be cool to have some canes that have some actual substats, or even better, vitality, because our weapons don't have vitality, so we have way less health than other jobs. But it would just be nice to have something that means we don't have to swap around our canes for each level. It's going to be annoying to have to carry a 60, 70, and 80 cane. We did see the addition of some effects on the Crafter and Gatherer relics, which I think are pretty cool. I don't remember seeing those in recent history. I haven't been playing too long though, so maybe I just missed them. But something like that could be cool if we had things that empowered the different mimicries. I don't really know how this would be balanced, but canes that empowered specific aspects, or depending on your mimicry, affected spells differently, it would probably be a nightmare to code. But something that enhances the actual feeling of the type of Blue Mage you're playing would be really cool. But bare minimum, I just want to not have to carry around a ton of canes for each level. And vitality would be really nice. Outside of raiding, I do want to see some more carnival stages. Don't get me wrong, I absolutely loved Go-Go as an encounter, but it was a huge bummer to see that we only got one additional stage at level 70. I'm not expecting a ton of stages. I mean, the 60 update only had 5 itself, but having a few would be really cool. I did also really like that Go-Go was mechanically interesting, more so than the other fights, I feel, except maybe 29. But it was less of a puzzle compared to some of the previous stages, aside from just, the mimicry, which is the first thing that he does. But it would be nice to have some of those puzzle-type stages again. I do miss having that. On the topic of Go-Go, I would also love to see some of the Blue Mage NPCs from previous games show up as quest NPCs. My dream would be for something like Quina from Final Fantasy IX to show up, as they've always been one of my favorite characters, and we haven't seen a ton of FF9 representation overall. I do think adding someone like Strago from FF6 or Kamari from FF10, especially since we have Hrothgar, so, can make a special model for Kamari just based on that. I think that would work well with what we've already seen, but just in general, I want to see some more Blue Mage NPCs. I got really excited when we saw Go-Go, so it'd be really cool to see some more like that. Now, I know Go-Go is a mimic, not a Blue Mage, but you all know what I mean. Seeing more references to previous games will be cool, especially Blue Mage references. Alright, so those are the things that I do want to see. There's really only one thing that I'm kind of neutral or ambivalent about, and that's Limit Break. A lot of people want Blue Mage to have a Limit Break and think that learning it from, Warrior of Light and Seed of Sacrifice would be cool. I do agree in concept, but I have some mixed feelings about it. Limit Break would be neat, and it feels weird to always just be wasting those bars, but how could we actually introduce it in a balanced way? If we have Mimicry-based Limit Break, it's a little bit awkward. We don't really need Tank LB3 because we have Diamondback, which is even better, and we don't need DPS Limit Break because we have Great Burst and things like Final Sting. So Healer Limit Break is the only one that really gives us something new. But I think it's kind of lame because the management of, raises and the sort of economy of having limited raises during encounters is one of the things that I think makes Blue Mage fights interesting. If we just give ourselves a free 8-man res, I think that kind of defeats one of the cool aspects of Blue Mage. But we could do something like apply an 8-man re-raise to everyone or something, and then, we just cheese at least one mechanic per fight by we all die and then we get res back again. But to be honest, the only way I would actually want to see something like a Healer LB3 for Blue Mage is if we were also able to do things like Uwu, where you need these limit breaks to progress the fight. I do think having a sort of different type of limit break for a Blue Mage could work though. The limit break that we get in Squadrons, the Ungarmax, I think would be kind of cool. It's kind of a meme, but something that just kind of buffs everyone in some way, rather than having a single LB effect, would be really interesting, and then it allows for, some coordination of a burst window that isn't necessarily tied to the 2-minute window. Again, I just kind of have mixed feelings about this, where I think introducing traditional LB type effects to Blue Mage defeats one of the things that makes it interesting, but also it feels kind of awkward to never be using Limit Break. I trust Square to be more creative than I am if they decide to add something like this, but I'm pretty neutral. If they add it, cool. If they don't add it, cool. I don't really care too much. Alright, now I'm going to list off some of the things that I don't want to see. First up, I don't want to see power creep at lower levels. This is kind of hard to avoid because Blue Mage is sort of designed to have everything available at all levels. We've seen that the additional damage from level 70 spells made the Morbal encounters significantly easier in a bunch of ways. I do think this is largely due to the way that those particular encounters are designed and how extra burst makes them much more trivial. Things like Omega Raids I think will be a little bit more resilient to that kind of thing, but I definitely don't want to see too much power creep. Whether that's just via a Maim and Men trait or something like that, I don't really care. Something more creative would be cool, but again, I'm not terribly creative, but something that sort of doesn't defeat the feel of Blue Mage having everything at all levels, while also not allowing for crazy power creep at the lower levels is really what I would like to see. The last thing that I don't want to see, and honestly I hope to never see, is role-based fight mechanics following mimicry. This is something that people I mention a lot and just complain about, but really I think that's what makes Blue Mage rating interesting, is when these role-based mechanics are totally random. The chaos of debuffs being assigned to different people every single time, I think gives the blue rating some of its charm, and it's why we have to come up with some wacky strats for fights, and I find that really interesting. Now, I do think having some consistent targeting could be helpful. We have our gavel groups where you're assigned either DPS or tank healer things, as long as no one dies, or there's the thing where Suzaku AoEs target the same person every single time. But I think things like that would be helpful for Junction Titan on E12, because otherwise that's kind of a pain. But I would rather that they don't touch this at all, rather than make it follow mimicries exactly. Now it's time for my favorite part, the things that I know will never happen, but are my pipe dreams for the job. So first up, I want to see Blue Mage being allowed into ultimate fights. We're not currently allowed because there is a fear that people will feel that their previous achievements are cheapened by Blue Mage being allowed in. But I don't really buy this explanation when you look at how Summoner, Gunbreaker, and Dancer perform in the Stormblood Ultimates. And then you have things like Yukab being cleared with all tanks, or 7 people, or, with 100 deaths. Like, it's crazy. I don't think that Blue Mage really cheapens any more than those things do. The other part of it is, with random targeting, a lot of the ultimate mechanics will actually get more difficult. Yes, things like tank mitigations will be a lot easier, raid-wide mitigations with Mighty Guard will be easier, burst phases will be easier, but things like hatches targeting tanks on, UCOB, that would be a nightmare if you have your tank in Diamondback and then they get targeted by a hatch. So you have to come up with slightly different ways to handle things, and I think that would make it a little bit more interesting, and that particular part gets more difficult. The other thing is, we already know that achievements can check for the presence of 8 Blue Mages with all of our Mightier Than achievements. So it'd be nice if there were 2 sets of achievements, one for 0 Blue Mages, which is what we have right now, and then one for 8 Blue Mages. Part of this would mean that you would also want to check at queue time so that you can only enter with 0 or 8 people, because you could make the argument that people can use Blue Mage to practice later mechanics by cheesing earlier mechanics. So really we would want to separate the two things entirely. And based on some of the things that I've seen of Final Fantasy UI code, I don't know if that would be technically possible, but it would be cool to see. In previous videos, I've mentioned spell slots a lot and how we're really limited on what we can and can't take for certain fights. And I think adding spell slots would be a technical nightmare behind the scenes, but it's my dream to have a trait that adds something like 4 more spell slots, but it's gated behind something like completing the full Mouse Carnival or some number of Blue Mage logs. I think incentivizing people to actually finish the full carnival forces them to practice a little bit outside of a bare minimum, and then incentivizing people to complete their log would just boost activity overall. Right now the rewards for log are pretty minimal, but something like this would be really great to see. And this kind of solves another thing where people keep asking for a Blue Mage duty finder, and I do kind of understand Square's stance on this, where there's no quality control on who you can take into, duties. If we could make Party Finder or something and, limit, have a checkbox where it's only people who have Angel Whisper or something like that can come in, then that would be nice, but I don't think we'll ever see that either. But, in the meantime, adding incentives for actually doing the Blue Mage log would make the overall activity level much higher without having to add a separate duty finder. And finally, my biggest dream, which a lot of folks are going to laugh at immediately since you've heard me talk about it before, especially if you hang out in Discord, is some kind of new archetype of Blue Mage in rating. We have tank, healer, and DPS, but it'd be cool to see some kind of pure support type. Now imagine a stance that makes it so you do 0 damage yourself, but then you can bring certain buffs that increase the group's damage overall, such that it's worth more than just having one additional Blue Mage in the group. And I think this would be fun to see, and like I said, Blue Mage doesn't really operate within the normal combat restrictions of 14, so it wouldn't break things too much for other stuff. And to me, this would sort of just be a more extreme form of Dancer. We could even tie this to something like healers, and then the main healer role in raids, which really is mostly just spamming Palm Cure and then using primals when they're able to, maybe can do something more meaningful. The other thing is this sort of tests or allows us to test different types of healer interactions that could be applied outside of Blue Mage. You know, it could be interesting to do a similar thing with other healers. I main healer when I'm raiding, and I agree that the healer rotation's kind of lame of just spamming a single spell. But, you know, if we test some other things where we have more meaningful rotations that aren't just keeping up a dot and spamming a single spell, I think it could make things more interesting overall. You know, so this doesn't just kill 2 birds with 1 stone here. This is like getting rid of an entire flock with a single flying sardine. We're going to be addressing a lot of things doing that. But again, I know it's never going to happen. It would probably be a technical nightmare to implement. It would be so weird to balance. You know, it's so outside the realm of what Square is trying to do with combat that, you know, I don't blame them for not even ever thinking of or considering this. But, you know, this is what I would love to see the most by far. Okie dokie. So that's where my head is currently at for level 80 stuff. I've got some more ideas, but they're smaller and less interesting, and I've already rambled long enough. But if you hang out in Discord, you'll definitely hear them from me. And there's other people in Discord who have really great ideas too, so it's worth joining. Just hang out, be part of the discussion. And part of that is I'm also really curious to hear what other folks think could be coming or what they want to see coming. So definitely drop a comment below, DM me, join Discord. Just find a way to share your thoughts. I'm really interested in what people think about Blue Mage in general. But as always, thanks for watching and have a good rest of your day.